Starts right now.
Hey, Martha,
I can't believe
great.
It's been 10 years. It feels like just yesterday that you took over for Brett, and his advice is certainly solid, and you've taken it and done an amazing job, Brett. So it's a pleasure to work with you so often, and we'll look forward to many more years together. Thank you, Brett.
You bet.
Breaking tonight. So, jobs were expected to go up by about 177,000 in December. So this morning, this eye-popping number took the screen, 312,000 jobs added. Manufacturing jobs posted their biggest gain in 20 years in the United States of America. So the Dow loved that, of course, up 746 points after a very rocky December. Kimberly Strassel of the Wall Street Journal is going to join me in just a moment with her take on what people are ignoring in the realities of the U.S. economy. That is coming up a bit later. But first tonight, the president continuing to do battle to fulfill his promise on the wall. He came out today from his meeting at the White House with GOP and Democrat leaders to say in part that successes now make the successes of now make the whole impeachment argument, he would say, a difficult one.
It's very hard to impeach somebody who's done a great job. That's number one. And we even talked about that today. I said, why don't you use this for impeachment? And Nancy said, we're not looking to impeach you. I said, that's good, Nancy, that's good. But you know what? You don't impeach people when they're doing a good job.
So more on that in a moment. But while the shutdown discussions appear to be at an impasse for now, the president was also asked about a new member of Congress who does want him out. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib said this on her first day.
People love you and you win. Woo! And when your son looks at you and says, Mama, look, you won, bullies don't win. And I said, baby, they don't, because we're going to go in there and we're going to impeach them.
Lovely, right? So similar sentiment, different language, though. We heard from the now new chair of the powerful House Intel Committee, Adam Schiff.
I presume it ends with Donald Trump being voted out of office. But Bob Mueller will have a lot to say about that.
So, and it's not going to happen soon, it doesn't seem, because today a grand jury that has already been impaneled by Bob Mueller for 18 months will now be extended, and we believe that extension is going to be for another 6 months. Here now on Manners and the showdown that is underway on a number of fronts. Former Arkansas governor and Fox News contributor Mike Huckabee, and former CIA officer and Democrat Brian Dean Wright, and former candidate for chairperson of the DNC and Fox News contributor Jimmy Green. Welcome, all of you. We had a lot in there. The economy is doing very well. Obviously, the jobs number was extremely strong. Then you've got that juxtaposed to this showdown over the shutdown, and then you have this looming investigation that continues to go on. So the question of impeachment against that backdrop, Governor Huckabee, let me start with you, was greeted with some pretty strong language by one of the newest members of Congress. Let's start there.
Well, let's be fair. Not all the Democrats are that vicious. They don't use that kind of language. And I think it would be unfair to paint all the Democrats with a broad brush. But it's disturbing that someone would say that. It's profane. It's vulgar. It's unnecessary. And frankly, it's nonsense. First of all, a lot of Americans don't seem to understand, and I don't guess she does either, that impeachment isn't removal from office. And as long as the Republicans have 53 members in the Senate, it would take all of the Democrats and 20 Republicans to get to a supermajority in order to remove the president. So this talk about impeachment is utter nonsense. I only, quite frankly, would hope that they would pursue it and push it and go all the way with it, because I think it would be the best way Donald Trump would be reelected and the Republicans would get control of the House again back in 2020.
Just one more question on the impeachment front before we move on to the other things. Jamu, let me get you to address it. What would you say to her about that comment?
So, for full disclosure, I am a Rashida Tlaib fangirl. She was trained by an organization, Vote Run Lead, that I served as board chair of, and we train women to run as you are. We train them to be unapologetic, and that is what we are seeing from her. As far as impeachment goes,
what would you
Martha,
say to her about that comment? That's totally separate from what you just said.
To the impeachment process, we are 2 years into this administration, and nearly every entity that President Trump has ever led is under investigation. Can you just back up and answer my question? I'm just curious what you would say to her. You said you're a friend and you support her. Do you support her using that
that language, which I wouldn't even, characterize on my show, about the President of the United States?
Look, I would not have used it, but the reality is, and I think Governor Huckabee probably knows this, and anyone who's ever watched the television show Veep, politicians curse, and they curse all the time. We're just not used to seeing it as so, up close and
not
personal,
generally in front of
but they do.
Cameras and intentionally in front of cameras.
They have sailor mouths, and I think anyone who's worked inside the Beltway understands that. The public just doesn't usually say that. But for impeachment, there is a serious conversation to be had when every entity that this president has led is under investigation, and he has surrounded himself, the administration is filled with family members, associates, advisors who are under investigation for a long list of influence peddling and money laundering, and I mean the list is so long. So if the founding fathers put an impeachment clause in the Constitution, is there any other situation that has been more tailor-made to at least
I don't know.
have this discussion?
A lot of these accusations that you just mentioned sound pretty familiar from prior administrations, so I don't know. Brian, let me get you to weigh in on here as we sort of look at this whole issue of the wall, the battle over the wall, your thoughts on where we stand with this showdown.
What a mess. Let's start with the immigration piece first. There is nobody in this country who looks at this thoughtfully and says, hey, you know what? We got 3,000 people coming across the border every day. It's not a problem. Of course it's a problem. Democrats are playing games. My party is absolutely on the losing end of this issue. We've handled it ridiculously. Representative Bustos today, in fact, said that she would be open and the party would be open to a partial wall. So let's just dispense with this ridiculousness about the wall and why this government is shut down. Let me address, secondly, this whole garbage of cursing, all right? Where I'm not concerned about a representative cussing. What I'm concerned about is the Democratic Party spending 2 years telling themselves and this country that there is evidence of collusion between Trump and Russia, and there is not. So what else do we expect? We have set the brush fire alive in this country that the president is guilty without evidence. That is the issue that your friend, the colleague that's speaking just before me, is avoiding when you ask her a tough question. There is no evidence. There are allegations. Let's wait until the evidence comes in. But let's not pretend the Democratic Party hasn't been lit on fire by all of these ridiculous allegations that have yet to be proven with one shred of evidence.
Clearly, Martha, you just laid out how the grand jury has been impaneled for an additional 6 months. That would not happen if this process was not moving through a high number of indictments, a high number of guilty pleas. There is progress being made, and to say that this is not an important conversation.
We haven't seen the end of the investigation. Hold on, we haven't seen the end of the investigation. When we do, we'll see what's in it. Governor Huckabee, I want to just get one last thought from you on the wall. I thought it was very interesting. Nancy Pelosi is calling the wall immoral, which just leads me to wonder if she would, and I mean this in a serious way, does she believe that we should dismantle the existing parts of the fence and wall that are there now? Are those also immoral because they do attempt to block people from entering the country?
That is the fairest question of all, because if it's immoral, if it's really a moral issue to protect our borders, then we shouldn't have any protection. And the 650 miles that we currently have, the Democrats should introduce legislation that would dismantle it. And we also should call out the Pope for having a wall around the Vatican. We should call out every major institution, including our prisons, for having walls if they're really immoral. I think that's a ridiculous statement, and it's an indefensible one. There's surely a way that we can bring this. I'd love to see us resolve DACA, get the border secure. This ought to be a bipartisan issue. It shouldn't be politicized, and it shouldn't be one of the things that's thrown in this ridiculous discussion of impeachment, because it's simply not going to happen. And I think American people are looking for people to lead, govern, and resolve issues, not just to stand off in corners and scream at each other. I
think you touched on something that may be the answer that we end up with here, which is a DACA border security trade-off. I think most Americans would be favorable towards that, so hopefully cooler heads can prevail, and we'll see where we go. Thank you all for being here tonight. Good to see you. Have a good weekend. Coming up next, a decorated Navy SEAL is accused of murdering an ISIS prisoner. He has pled not guilty in a California courtroom today. We will speak exclusively with his brother Sean, who says the elite Special Forces officer was stripped of due process in his own country. That is next. Breaking tonight, an elite Navy SEAL and two-time Bronze Star recipient is facing charges of premeditated murder in the death of a detained ISIS prisoner of war. Today, Special Operations Chief Edward Gallagher came face-to-face with a judge to plead his case. In moments, we hear exclusively from his attorney and his brother Sean. But first, Trace Gallagher has the backstory tonight. Hi, Trace.
Hi, Martha. By all accounts, 39-year-old Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher is an elite warrior and modern-day war hero. His combat resume is long and impressive. But Navy prosecutors paint a picture of a highly trained fighter who, during his 8th deployment, went off the rails, a man who used drugs, indiscriminately fired at Iraqi civilians, and fatally stabbed a captured Islamic State fighter who was thought to be about 15. Prosecutors say Gallagher then took photos of himself holding a knife and the boy's body, later sending the picture to a fellow Navy SEAL with the caption, quote, "I got him with my hunting knife." More damning is that prosecutors built their case on the testimony of Gallagher's fellow Navy SEALs, a military brotherhood like no other, and investigators say when some of those SEALs first tried to report Gallagher's misdeeds, he threatened to kill them. But Eddie Gallagher also has numerous supporters, including top Iraqi military leaders who claimed to be eyewitnesses, saying the 15-year-old ISIS fighter died from enemy gunshot wounds, and that Eddie Gallagher and other SEAL medics were trying to save the boy so they could eventually interrogate him. And there are also accusations stating that the Navy SEALs who accused Gallagher of killing the boy were malcontents, who Gallagher reprimanded for not wanting to engage in combat. Today in court, a number of Eddie Gallagher's fellow SEALs spoke on his behalf, saying they would trust him with their lives, even under these allegations. Watch.
I can stand by my friend and know that he's a good man. He's had 19 and a half years of deployment and service for our country. And in all his years of deployment, he's been our #1 chief, #1 platoon operator. And he's been nothing but a valiant guy.
And now a Gold Star father of a Navy SEAL killed in combat has opened his house for Eddie Gallagher to stay in when he's released from prison. Today, a judge ruled that Gallagher would go on trial sometime between February 19th and March 1st, and Gallagher has agreed to a trial before a military jury, 1/3 of whom will be enlisted personnel. Martha.
Trace, thank you very much. Here now exclusively, Edward Gallagher's attorney, Philip Stackhouse, and his brother, Sean Gallagher. Welcome to both of you. Good to have you here tonight. Sean, let me start with you. Trace laid it out on both sides, his supporters and his detractors. And you say that his detractors are telling lies. Explain.
Every single statement that was just said, every accusation made, every slanderous comment, all boils down to this bottom line. My brother reprimanded a couple guys in combat who buckled under his leadership because they were new and inexperienced and because they put men's lives in danger and not wanting to take the fight to the enemy. My brother called them out on this. He reprimanded them, and when they got back, only months later, they spun up these stories. And so every allegation you just heard stems from a couple of malcontents who even admitted to tampering with my brother's rifle so that he couldn't fire at the enemy in combat. This is how reckless they were. And so this entire investigation, I want to make it clear, crystal clear, is based upon lies. It's based upon the testimony of these malcontents who were so concerned about their own reputation that they spun stories to paint my brother as a villain so that they could escape criticism.
So this jury, Mr. Stackhouse, is going to hear both sides of this story. And I would imagine they're going to see the evidence of these photographs of him holding the body and the knife as well?
Well, I can't discuss what's contained in those pictures because there's a protective order that's been issued by the convening authority in the case. But I can tell you that any pictures that are available, I would expect will be shown during the trial. And that's fine. I mean, I will tell you now, we will be showing those pictures as well. And they show exculpatory evidence for our case.
Sean, you know, there were 9 members of Navy SEAL Team 7 who have testified against your brother. So you're saying that these are the couple of individuals who he reprimanded, 9 of them?
No, so it's not exactly that way. There's only a couple who actually make these damning statements. There are 9 that prosecutors claim to be on their side, but have actually just lawyered up and don't want to talk to them because they're afraid they're going to be gone after the same way my brother has been gone after. So you have to look at this case as just an overzealous, out-of-control prosecution that's trying to make a career of taking down a Navy SEAL, which should make every American's blood boil because of the premise. The premise of this thing is that my brother killed an already dying ISIS fighter in combat. That's brass tacks. He denies all of it. We have mounds of evidence that exonerate him, and yet, even in spite of all of this, prosecutors try against these 9 guys and against other guys of Eddie's teammates to try and intimidate them, and by saying, I'm going to go after your career, I'm going to end your Navy SEAL career if you don't start lying about Eddie Gallagher. And this is the kind of treatment that we've experienced horrendously over the past 4 to 5 months.
Gentlemen, thank you. It's obviously a very emotional issue for your family. He has 3 children. He served 8 tours of duty, the last one in Mosul, Iraq, trying to clear ISIS from there. Gentlemen, we'll be watching, and we thank you very much for being here tonight to tell your story. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
You bet. So still ahead tonight, one of the most used arguments to reopen the government.
Don't hold millions of Americans, hundreds of thousands of workers hostage.
So who's really impacted by this shutdown? The president said he would be willing to let it go on for years. He doesn't want that, but he says that could be. Chris Starwalt with the real story next.
He also said, you said in the meeting, this is him quoting you, I just want to check, that the shutdown could go on for months or even a year or longer. Did you say that? And
I
is
did.
that your,
I did.
Is that your assessment of where we are?
That. Absolutely, I said that.
So what is a safety net for federal workers? You're saying months and possibly a year for this shutdown. Do you have in mind a safety net for those who need their checks?
Well, the safety net is going to be having a strong border because we're going to be safe. I'm not talking about economically, but ultimately economically. I really believe that these people, many of the people that we're talking about, many of the people you're discussing, I really believe that they agree with what we're doing.
That was President Trump today admitting that the government shutdown could continue for months, even years. They are going to meet this weekend, hoping to resolve it. But as of right now, you've got 14 days into this, 800,000 government workers affected who have not yet, nobody, as of right now, this minute, has missed a paycheck. Their official payday is not, the period ends on Monday. They wouldn't get paid until next Friday. So if they resolve it between now and then, nobody will have missed a payment. Employees still on the job include more than 41,000 federal law enforcement and correctional officers, 54,000 Customs and Border Protection agents, and 42,000 Coast Guard employees, those told not to report to work, 21,000 people at the Commerce Department, nearly all of NASA, 10,000 State Department employees, and 45,000 people who work at the IRS. So maybe we'll get a little extra time on the taxes. Here to help separate fact from fiction, Chris Starwalt, Fox News politics editor. You know, Chris, I looked through, some of the, obviously nobody wants anyone who lives paycheck to be put in a dire situation. But just listening to politicians and looking at some of the examples that have crossed so far, it does not appear that anyone, at least as of right now, has entered that dire situation since the paycheck wouldn't even be here till next Friday.
So there are government contractors who have not been paid, and they probably won't. Those things don't get rectified at the end, and our government relies on a lot of contractors. So there are some people who have not, who in fact have missed paychecks. But for the bulk of these more than 800,000 workers that you're talking about, 1 week from today is D-Day. That's when they miss a paycheck because they're on the, I think the 22nd of December. They're on a long pay cycle, and they're due next Friday. And for a lot of families, of course, that would be consequential. But you're right. To this point, this isn't missed paychecks for full-time government employees.
Yeah, one of the stories that one of the new congresswomen told on the floor yesterday in terms of how dire this situation is that someone fell down in a national park and the people who were supposed to be there working weren't there, but that someone else carried him down and he was fine in the end. There's another story floating around out there about a death in Yosemite, which is obviously tragic. A man fell into a river and died of a head injury. But the headline says, death in Yosemite as man falls during government shutdown.
Well, if they closed the parks, it wouldn't have happened. Now, look, I have no idea whether this guy would have gone on to his reward had the Rangers have been there and have things been operating under normal circumstance. But the park was open, so that wouldn't have normally been the case under past shutdowns.
The point is, in the 10 seconds that we have left, how dire is this situation, and do you think it'll be open before next Friday?
The president says we'll go on for months or years. That won't happen because the people will quit and the Republicans in the Senate will break. If they don't have this done by next Friday, the consequences mount, and the pressure on the president to come to an agreement will be enormous.
We will see what happens. Chris, thank you very much. Chris Stirewalt weighing in from D.C. tonight. The Wall Street Journal's Kimberly Strassel is up next.
$312,000 jobs was a tremendous number, and obviously having a big impact on the stock market today. I don't think there was one Wall Street genius, of which I know many of them, but they're not geniuses. There's not one that predicted anywhere close to these job numbers.
So President Trump touting a blockbuster jobs report that came out today. The United States added 312,000 jobs in December, blowing away expectations, as the president was just saying. Dow was up nearly 800 points. It is up 8% since Christmas Eve. It's been a rocky December, but a good start to the year. So in the jobs number, a trend that we have been seeing for months is the recovery is strongest among less educated workers who are now being hired in some jobs that they might not have been hired in the past. So why is that? What does all of this really signal underneath all of the noise? Joining me now is Kimberly Strassel, Wall Street Journal columnist and member of the editorial board. Kimberly, good to have you with us tonight. Good to see you. I guess, first of all, your top line reaction to this number today.
Well, look, this is a reminder, a very vivid reminder, that the fundamentals of the U.S. economy are strong, and people have been scratching their heads looking at the stock market. This is a reminder that when it comes to growth, when it comes to the jobs, hiring, all of those numbers and indicators, they're fine. What's driving that stock market is uncertainty about things like trade, for instance, what the Fed is going to do next. That's a legitimate concern. But if you're just looking at the U.S. economy, we're in great shape, in part because of the tax cuts and deregulation.
And that's what drove Larry Kudlow, the president's economic advisor, to say this earlier today.
There is no recession coming. There is no recession in sight. Consumers are strong. Jobs are rising. Wages are rising.
I want to put up a chart that came out this morning that shows the increase in less skilled, less educated workers. It's kind of hard to see on this because it shows such a long period of time. But if you look towards the very end of it, you see upticks, and it's a 5.6% increase for people without a high school education. The other two categories of education are also elevating over recent months, but that group is elevating the most. Why do you think that is, Kimberly?
Well, it's a great but underreported aspect of the economic growth that we're seeing is that the deregulation in particular and the tax cuts have re-inspired whole sectors of the economy. In particular, we're talking about places like manufacturing that do rely more on low-skilled workers. I think it also doesn't get enough attention. This is an administration earlier this year, or earlier last year, I should say, in 2018, was making a big push for more vocational education. Back in the summer, the president signed an overhaul of a career and technical education bill, all again designed at making sure that we're looking at those parts of the economy that too often get neglected. We spend so much time talking about college education, which is important, but it takes all types of workers to make an economy go, and what we have is a situation where the jobs are there and we have people who can fill them.
You know, you look back to the campaign and you think about the president talking about the forgotten men and women. You look at suicide rates among men, primarily white men in their 30s and 40s in this country that have really skyrocketed in a very alarming way. Is what we're seeing here a positive on that front, do you think, or is that, too big a leap?
No, Absolutely. Look, we all know people take pride and joy and comfort in knowing that they have good jobs that they can provide for their families. And again, we have a lot of focus, especially among our upper echelons in Washington and different parts of the society, focused entirely on college education. And what that forgets is that there are millions of jobs out there that are very well paying, that are trade-based, skills-based, vocational-based. And again, we're seeing an uptick in the areas that want those kind of jobs. Anytime, by the way, too, Martha, that an economy is growing, you're putting in more infrastructure, utilities, grids. You need pipe fitters, you need electricians. These are all well-paying, good jobs, and we're seeing a resurgence in that.
Kimberly Strassel, thank you very much. Good to see you tonight.
Thanks. You too.
So coming up next, an incredible story of faith and hope and love, how one special couple forever changed the lives of two young children who were horribly abused in one of Texas's most horrific child abuse cases. That family joins us tonight.